Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan, MSB. This is Ukraine War Frontline update for the 29th of April 2023. I just had to tear myself away from drinking tea in the kitchen and singing Morrissey with my partner's daughter. Good times. However, we have maps to look at, so let's get to it. Before I go to the northeast sector of the front line, usual starting place, I just want to go to the ISW, Institute for the Study of War, American military think tank, to just talk about something very briefly that I haven't mentioned in my last two news updates that I should have done. Okay, Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a decree on the 27th codifying conditions for the further large-scale deportation of Russia of residents of occupied areas of Ukraine. This is massively important. I talked a couple of days ago about how Russia have got good form over history of deporting people from areas they want to control and taking their own sort of indigenous ethnic Russians, bringing them into those areas and assimilating the two kind of cultures and peoples, so that it's very difficult for the people in those areas to argue for independence because they are essentially Russian. And that's kind of what's happened since 2014 in Donbass and Crimea, and it is continuing to happen in the occupied regions. Putin has signed a decree entitled "On the Peculiarities of the Legal Status of Certain Categories of Foreign Citizens and Stateless Persons in the Russian Federation," that defines those who are living in Russian-occupied territories who have declared their desire to retain their current citizenship and refuse to accept Russian passports as, quote, foreign citizens and stateless persons currently residing in the Russian Federation. So I just want to hammer this home, right? And for those pro-Russian voices in the threads that I really have very little time for because you're morally incompatible with me, this is not liberation, right? When you liberate places, you allow them freedom to say, this is who I am, and this is who I feel I am, and this is who I want to be. You don't say, I'm liberating you, and by the way, if you don't kind of adhere to the identity that I think you should have, I'm going to deport you to somewhere else. I'm going to punish you for that. That is not liberation. So it doesn't cut the raw prawn with me, I can tell you. Just, as you can see, I get annoyed because those people are just paid up Kremlin bots that don't have a moral fiber in their body, or there are people that are just burying their head in the sand when that sand is the moral landscape, and they're not bringing their head up to survey the moral landscape and adopt a position of decency, right? So this is not what decent states do. This is what invading, oppressing states that are trying to take over the territory of other countries. And if people don't understand that, if I don't know, other mappers don't understand that, other analysts on the internet who seem to be siding with the Russian Empire as it is to, Soviet Union 2.0, then I don't know. It's just sad that people want to just ignore that. Anyway, rant over. The decree holds that, I'll probably continue, the decree holds that such individuals may continue to reside in occupied territories until July the 1st, 2024. Well, that's kind. Suggesting that these individuals may be subject to deportation following this date. This decree codifies coercive methods to encourage residents of occupied areas to receive Russian passports, and also sets conditions for the deportation of Ukrainians who do not agree to become Russian citizens. Russian authorities are also continuing their efforts to deport Ukrainians, particularly children, to Russia under various schemes. ISW continues to assess that all lines of effort aimed at deporting Ukrainians to Russia may constitute a violation of the Geneva Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, as well as potential deliberate ethnic cleansing campaign. I don't need to say much more than that. I mean, this is why I consistently say I'm pro-Ukrainian, right? That doesn't mean that I'm pro-Ukrainian in a way that I'm just going to massage data to support my moral view, but I am morally pro-Ukrainian for reasons such as that, and I think it's fairly obvious to anyone that is the way to go. Right, let's go to the front line. Let's hope that rant doesn't get in the way of me analysing what is going on in a fair and objective way. So here we have Kupiansk to Svatova to Kreminna, the axis down here. We're going to go to my map, which looks like this: Kupiansk there, down to Svatova, and then further down south to Kreminna. Russian forces continue ground attacks near Kreminna and have made an incremental advance northwest of Kreminna as of April 28th. Geolocated footage posted on yesterday shows that Russian forces have advanced in the area about 10 kilometers northwest of Kreminna. Let's see where their advances are. So this refers to some footage of the 25th Separate Airborne Brigade destroying 2 Russian BMP-2s, which means Russians are here. One was blown up by mines, the second was punished by artillery. And this has been geolocated to this point. Let's find out where the Russians then are. And we can plug that into our Google Maps to see where they have advanced to, as according to the ISW. So, advances. Okay. Again, I wouldn't say that constitutes advances. That's exactly where I thought they were. However, this caveat, I have changed my maps because this was the area that that I had contradiction, was as in there were claims that the Ukrainians had taken back this area here, and then there were claims that the Russians had pushed the Ukrainians back. So what this is, ISW is correct here in saying this is an advance because actually they are back to where they were before the Ukrainians made a counterattack within the last week, I think it was. So that confirms what pro-Russian mappers are saying, which is that that counterattack has been countered in a counterattack. So the Russians are back to where they were, and those lines are at least somewhat accurate, as according to the geolocation there. Now, also talks about unsuccessful attacks in or near Dubrova, in the Serebryanska forest, and Bilohorivka, Torska, Terny, and so on and so forth. So the usual culprits here: Terny, Torska, Dubrova, Bilohorivka. Activity there, but nothing unusual, nothing that we don't expect in that area. Right, let's move a little bit further south to Bakhmut. Just to let you know that on Telegram, Rebar, the pro-Russian source, says that it's fairly stable up the Kupiansk-Kreminna axis and that there's positional fighting going on, but that the Ukrainians are apparently reinforcing the lines there, as according, as I say, to Rebar. Then we come down to the Bilohorivka towards Bakhmut. This is Vuhledar's map that indicates that the Ukrainians are pushing back in the Bilohorivka area. Those yellow arrows have been there for the last sort of 3 or 4 days. The Russians are starting to pressure there themselves and in the forest area, so there is activity there. And then we come on down to the Bakhmut area. This is what it looks like as far as Vuhledar's map is concerned. So there's advances to the south. Actually, I'd already got that. Advances to the east. Actually, I think, well, Syriac Maps, a pro-Russian mapper, has all of this area under Ukrainian control there to the east of that road. In fact, if we look at Syriac Maps, then situation Bakhmut, Russian army captured the remaining area of the big garage complex from the north and the gas department from the east, and managing to enter the first buildings of the medical college. So this is in this area here. If we go to my map, let's go and give ourselves a bit of an idea of where this all is. So as we come in, yellow lines refer to deep state map, red lines refer to Syriac map, which is pro-Russian, deep state's pro-Ukrainian. No movement from the pro-Ukrainian deep state map. I don't know if it just means they haven't updated Bakhmut at the moment, so they haven't shown any changes. That doesn't mean there isn't any. Syriac Maps is showing, as you can see, this area. I've left my blue lines just to give you an indication of the area that has been taken by the Russians, as according to Syriac Map, which is indicated here, and then furthermore here, saying that they took full control over the medical college and broke the main defense lines of the Ukrainian army in its last stronghold, located in Kreminna and Novyi districts. So there we go. And then Syriac Maps says, so as you can see, all up to the road here, and in fact, straight along there. So if you go to, say, War Mapper, all of this area here is under Russian control, as according to Syriac Maps, and indeed pretty much most of this area up here as well. And Vuhledar, that would be here and there. So there are differing opinions of what's going on, but I would generally side with Syriac Maps. The pro-Russian mappers are usually accurate when the Russians are doing really well, because they kind of champion those claims, and they're generally accurate. And pro-Ukrainian mappers are much more cautious when the Russians are on the attack, as you can see here. Now, Surek also says 10% of Bakhmut is under Ukrainian control, 90% under Russian control. If you take the wider area of Bakhmut and land outside it, that percentage is actually far more, I would argue. No report says in the front Bakhmut, fighting continues west of Bakhmut train station and near the second city hospital. Russian forces control the Bakhmut Industrial College. There is actually fighting still going on there. That's what hands, I think, a couple of times, but there are tanks that have, I think there's recent footage of tanks. In fact, Syriac Maps, I'm sure, talks about that here. Yeah, here we go. Recent footage shows Ukrainian army tanks firing at Russian army positions in the industrial college, despite the latest Russian advances along the entire front. Bakhmut, Ukrainian troops are still sending reinforcements and putting up a fierce fight. So this college here, I'll just show you what they're talking about. So there are tanks, Ukrainian tanks firing on this college, and that's been geolocated to here. And this is basically this kind of big square there. As you can see, there was this a couple of days ago, an advance here. Then I think it sort of went back and forwards, and then it's now, I think, in Russian hands for sure. But the Ukrainians are, as it indicates there, firing on them with mechanized equipment. And that is the industrial college. So if you hear that mentioned, that's what it refers to. But anyway, back to no reports. Russian forces control the Bakhmut Industrial College. In addition, the map has been adjusted to the current situation where more area is under the control of Russian troops, and that is pretty much in line with what Syriac Map says, although there's a yellow bit there where it's got a grey zone, but I'm pretty sure that the Russians would be somewhat in control of that. Rebar says the situation in northern part of Bakhmut, units of the PMC Wagner took full control over Koshevoy Street, concentrating their offensive potential on squeezing the enemy into the western outskirts. In the central part of the city, the Wagnerites are engaged in a shooting battle with the enemy on the territory of Bakhmut Medical College. On the southern outskirts, Russian assault units liberated an industrial technical school, expanding the control zone to Tchaikovsky Street. Now, there are lots of claims about, even from Prigozhin himself, as I reported in my news video this morning, that Wagner are not long for the world, that they've maybe got, they're soon going to be out of existence. He said that that's not a problem, that's how it goes. You are starting to see them being replaced by conventional troops all around Bakhmut, and that may continue to the point where it's a Russian conventional army that eventually takes control of Bakhmut, and that would please the MOD, would please, I guess, Shoigu and the Kremlin much more than having the private military company take all the plaudits for that. And you know that will be kind of it's not a shame for Prigozhin, because I could give a monkey's arse about him, but you know he's put in all the effort into taking Bakhmut, and then has sort of culminated, run out. They've been exhausted in terms of the troops are physically and mentally exhausted, but in terms of also getting recruits, new recruits and convicts in to freshen up the forces, to reconstitute them, to reinforce them, they've been disallowed from recruiting. So the Russian MOD have been quite wily and the Kremlin in basically not allowing Prigozhin's Wagner PMC to continue to maintain its strength in Bakhmut. It's done all the legwork, and then the Russian MOD comes in and just puts a flag in at the end, and there's nothing left of Wagner. So it looks like that's how it's going to pan out. Right, let's go and see what RSW has to say. My partner's daughter has just delivered a lovely cup of tea, so I'm a very lucky guy. ISW talks about geolocated footage suggesting that the Russians control the industrial college and they're putting pressure on the T0504. So if we go back into the map of Bakhmut, we can see the T-0504 coming in there, and that passes the industrial college in this area. So it's one thing to say that the Russians are putting pressure on the T-0504, but actually you might think that would be along this Ivanivska area here, but actually it's much more likely to be within Bakhmut itself. And of course, that doesn't matter as much having pressure on that road here as it does cutting it up back here. So I think we're going to expect to see the road interdicted well within Bakhmut as Bakhmut continues to move to being under Russian control. Now, I have heard several things. Ukraine, the latest, were talking about this yesterday, I think, that there is apparently, rumor has it, there's going to be some big surprise. That could be either psyops, it could be that there is a surprise, it could be there's a new bit of technology to be used, it could be a counterattack. Something might happen or something might not happen around Bakhmut. Because it's going to be, I think, about May the 9th. May the 9th, Victory Day, is this really big day that the Russians would definitely want Bakhmut to be captured by. Then you can bet your bottom dollar they're going to shout to the rafters about it. And I guess if Ukraine are going to do anything, they'll want to pull the rug out from under the Russians around that date. So, will Russia take Bakhmut by then? Absolutely could be on the cards. It's looking like they're going to, if they're advancing at this rate and they've got another 9 days, there's not going to be anything left of Bakhmut under Ukrainian control. But do the Ukrainians have something to bring to bear here, or is that itself psyop? So that's definitely something to look out for over the coming week or so. So before we leave Bakhmut, let's look at Vuhledar's map. As you can see, red arrows all in the center of Bakhmut. Yellow arrow representing the Ukrainians still pushing back around the Kreminna to keep the 00506 highway away from being interdicted. Certainly on land, obviously you can take indirect fire and whatnot, and you wouldn't want to be traveling on that anyway. But that is the activity there, and then a push maybe down towards Topochki. So that is Vuhledar. Let's now go to Adivka, and we come out of Bakhmut further down south here, and Adivka here. There is not a lot to report. I mean, ISW says all the usual places: Pervomaisky, Sidvierny, Krasnohorivka, and then it goes further down south to Marinka and Novomykhailivka. Repelled attacks there, but it doesn't seem to be any advancing. With Russian Mill Blogger claims that there are advances near Krasnohorivka. It's not represented in any mapping, and that is from the 27th. And another Mill Blogger claimed that yesterday the Russian forces attacked Ukrainian positions on a southwestern approach to Adivka, but other than that, really not a lot to report from there. So we will move down to Marinka. Marinka still, there's a lot of footage coming out Marinka of first-person view drones taking out bits of equipment further back. I showed you a couple of them yesterday, of a few. So tanks being taken out in various places back behind, quite far back from the front line. So that is. There is still activity in Marinka. It doesn't say too much in the ISW about activity there, so we will continue. In fact, if we go to Rebar Pro Russian source, or it says of Marinka and Adivka, the situation has not changed significantly. Russian units are fixed in currently occupied strongholds. The places of concentration of personnel of Ukrainian formations are hit by guided bombs. These FAB 500 really are still quite a problem. Just beautiful, man. I love a good cup of tea. Right. As we come further down south past Novomykhailivka, some mention of that, but nothing too explicit. Then we get on to Vuhledar, where we have Pavlivka and Merkilska to the south of Vuhledar. Vuhledar is on the high ground, as I always tell you, where it can overlook the lower ground, so it can spot artillery, it can send ATGMs at the Russians here, and it's just a really difficult place for the Russians to take. There are different claims over the weeks that the Russians are within these dacha areas and not within them, and actually it seems to have calmed down a lot around here as the Russians have possibly realize that they are beating their heads against a brick wall, and trying to do the same thing over and over and expecting different results is indeed the definition of insanity. So what they've done now, what they are doing, is using guided bombs, as we just heard about up in Marinka and Adivka. This is happening around here, and we're starting to see some of these larger buildings actually be reduced to rubble, as opposed to with artillery where they just get blackened, but they're not fundamentally challenged as structures. What the ISW says here is Ukrainian forces have advanced in western Donetsk. That's Ukrainian forces. Geolocated footage posted on April the 28th, it's yesterday, shows Ukrainian forces advanced southwest of Pavlivka, 3 kilometers southwest of Vuhledar. So the Ukrainian forces have advanced southwest of Pavlivka. Interesting. So if Pavlivka is here, southwest could be over in this direction here. So what's it referring to? Ukrainian infantry is shelled by the Russians, which means the Ukrainian infantry are here. Okay, where is here? Where are the Ukrainian infantry at, so that they are being pressured by the Russian artillery? And man, I wish my mouse would work. Okay, there we go. And let's plug that in, see where they are at. Okay, so that indicates there could well be an advance of Ukrainian infantry, that they are getting behind what I had as the lines here. Interesting that they'll be moving there. Is this some kind of reconnaissance in force? Is this probing? Is this giving the people in Pavlivka something to think about? Is this ahead of a counteroffensive? Is this what's going on there? But certainly some activity there, and I haven't really seen ever actually, since I've been doing this mapping, activity around here. You talk about towards Preshchivka, with the Russians moving towards there, but I haven't seen the Ukrainians themselves on the advance anywhere around here. You know, not since Pavlivka was itself taken. All the activity has been, you know, in front of these places. So interesting that there is some kind of advance in that area. Russian MOD claimed that Russian forces struck Ukrainian positions near Pavlivka. That would indicate probably that with artillery, Russian forces did not conduct any confirmed or claimed ground attacks in western Donetsk. It goes on to say Russian forces have likely allocated TOS A1 thermobaric artillery systems, which are military level, district level assets, to Adivka and western Donetsk Oblast axes, indicating potential preparations to intensify offensive operations. The DNR posted footage on the 28th, purportedly of the Russian 40th Naval Infantry Brigade, so those are the Marines that have been pretty much ripped apart around Vuhledar a number of times, firing a TOS-1A system in Adivka direction. I always find it interesting when they mention this, because it's not the sort of machinery that an elite crack group like the Marines would normally be using. So it seems like these marine elements are being made to do your standard maneuvers that otherwise you would have your more conventional Russian forces doing, your mechanized brigades and so on and so forth. What does that indicate? Does it indicate a devaluing of the Marines, that they've been reconstituted, or they've been taken apart so many times that now the force quality of these guys is no different from the regular infantry or soldiers, so that they're being used as such? Or is it to say they've run out these other troops, or I don't know, brigades, whatever? It's just interesting that you would start giving this kind of artillery to the naval infantry brigades. Correct me if I'm wrong about that, but that would be my questions is, you know, what does that show us? And it's either way, it's probably not a good sign for the Russians that has taken place. Right, if we go a little bit further on into Zaporizhia area, so if we come out from the western Donetsk Oblast and move towards the Zaporizhia Oblast, you can see these thin dotted lines there. That is the Oblast border. So this is Zaporizhia here. We can look at some footage. Where is it? Here we go. HIMARS strike in Zaporizhia Oblast. So this is the one on the officers' camp that reported on this morning in the news video, and we'll plug that in and see where HIMARS has hit, just for a bit of something else. So that this is between Tokmak and the reservoir. Tokmak here is surely going to be one of those places that is very likely to be attacked in the coming counteroffensive. There are defensives built all around Tokmak. It's been, you've got Dragon's Teeth and trenches and whatnot, fully surrounded Tokmak. But it is, as you can see, a road network hub as well as a railway passes just to the south of there. If we look on a war map, you get an idea. Tokmak there, so it passes to the south. So Tokmak does get hit routinely, and HIMARS is still active around in that area, taking out a base with Russian officers. Okay, let's have a look, see if ISW has anything else to add. Right, so the ISW really doesn't say an awful lot. It talks about the missiles that the Ukrainians have been firing against the Russians around Dnipro River that I showed yesterday. So still talking about that. Still talking about whether there's going to be a counteroffensive across the river and the speculation from both sides about that. But really, that's about it. We are continuing to see this. I guess this transition from a Russian offensive to a Russian defensive, as the counteroffensive, people are talking more and more about that. Reznikov has said on the one hand, people are getting overheated. They're talking this up too much. Don't get too excited. It might be very different to how you think it might look. And on the other hand, saying, yeah, we're almost ready. It's good to go. And then lots of people saying, yeah, this is going to be all singing, all dancing. So there are all sorts of ideas flying around the information space about the counteroffensive, where it's going to be, how big it's going to be, what's going to happen. It's easy to get carried away, and I flip from being really positive to being really cautious and wondering what's going to happen after the counteroffensive. But is there enough momentum to keep going and to keep the efforts up so that it doesn't draw to close, and then Russia are back to being able to draw this thing out for a really, really long time? You want the counteroffensive to be so amazingly successful that it kind of puts an end to any Russian ideas of continuing to fight this war. But of course, that's a real idealistic thinking and is highly unlikely. There is a chance that the Russians could be really routed and could crumble and collapse, but there's also a chance that it could just be bogged down and be slow attritional warfare. Just all sorts of things could happen, and how the Russians react, I'm not sure. And of course, the better Ukrainians do, the more likely the Russians are to do something crazy, and that is always the problem. Anyway, I did a video on that called the Putin paradox or something. It's like this: the better the Ukrainians do, the worse it might be for them. Type scenario. So anyway, that's that for the front line. Hope that's okay for you. It's been a little bit rushed today. If you hear babies and toddlers and people around, it's lots of family around today, so I better get back to it. I'll try and do my extra later on today, because oh my goodness, do I have a lot of extra stuff to talk about. Only talking about one subject yesterday with very few kind of links. I've got a whole long list of stuff to talk about, so I will try and get out an extra video a little bit later. Tomorrow's going to be a bit funky. I've got to go off to a rugby tournament for most of the day tomorrow. Not for me playing, goodness me. If you ask me to run, I can't even run. I'd physically fall over with my multiple sclerosis. So yeah, I ain't going to be playing rugby, but I can live my exercise vicariously through my children, and so that's what I'm going to be doing. Anyway, you don't need to know that. Till the pips. I'll speak to you at some point, somewhere soon-ish or something.